welcome to the first SNCC Beers and Brews. Thank you so much, Nikki and Merritt, for putting this together. A little round of applause for them. I think the community is huge, and I've been here for about 2.5 years, and this is kind of the first time I've really participated in the larger Vegas community. So happy to see you all here. I was expecting maybe a handful of close friends, so to see this kind of turn out is honestly, it means a lot. So thank you so much for coming. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Kyle Broxterman. I am the furthest thing from a professional athlete or a certified AMGA guide, so all the advice I have for you tonight, please take with a grain of salt. It is all anecdotal and out of personal experience. I have been climbing trad for about 10 years, which is as long as I've been climbing. And kind of notable sense, just to give you a roundabout kind of idea of what I am as, who I am as a climber. I've done Rainbow Wall, Original Route, Cloud Tower, Levitation. I just did Voyager, going for half dome in a day on Saturday. So that's kind of like where I live right now in the trad realm. Still progressing, still learning every day, but kind of like, especially, with this injury I'm going to go into, I'm climbing routes now that I thought were just impossible. So really cool to see some progression kind of through my climbing career. Although I'm not wearing the yellow pants, I am the climber behind the Instagram channel Brox Rocks. If you guys, any of you are familiar, I post kind of POV climbing content. And then I'm also the host and founder of the Climbing Majority podcast. Raise of hands, who has heard of the show? And who has listened to at least one episode? Okay, nice, awesome. I was expecting a bunch of hands to go down, so this is really cool to see that. So for anybody that hasn't heard of the podcast, essentially, I'm here to give the voice to the climbing majority. I feel like there's a big discrepancy right now between the media's attention on kind of the 1% of climbers versus the rest of us. I would say we're all part of the majority here. We all have our own stories, we all have our own lessons. And the cool thing about climbing is that you don't have to be a pro. It's not like baseball or football where it's all hyper-focused on the peak performance. With climbing, there's risk, there's adventure, there's all these lessons and life lessons we learn and carry on with our lives through the sport of climbing. And so I find that there are so many stories of the majority that get lost. And so that's kind of what the podcast is about. Been doing it for 3.5 years now, 2.5 years, 94 episodes in, had some really cool guests, and it's just been a really cool passion project. So if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. Kind of like the start of the podcast, I got myself into an injury, and this accident is kind of the foundation I want to lay for a larger conversation about the nuances of risk management, safety systems, and trad gear. I guess I'll just dive into the accident itself. So I think it's important to explain kind of who I was as a climber before the accident. So COVID hit. I had been climbing for a couple years, not super seriously. Like I said, I started trad right away. COVID hit. I got laid off of my job. I was on unemployment. And so I'm in this transitionary state in my life where I don't have a career, don't really have a path. The one thing I knew about my life was that I loved climbing. It was a huge passion of mine. I had already kind of started the grassroots of the Instagram channel. I had been seeing some traffic there. So, with not much direction in my life, that was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna lean into this while I have some time. I'm gonna climb and become a better climber. And to me at that time, it was very black and white. It was, to be a better climber, I need to climb harder grades. That was kind of like my understanding of it. It wasn't, I need to be better at risk management. I need to be better at safety. I need to be better at all these things that allow me to climb harder. It was just, I need to climb harder. And so what did I do? I looked up mountain project in the local area and I was like, I'm gonna climb a 10C because at the time I had built a huge foundation of about 5.9s and like low 5.10s. And so Hannah and I, we got on this route in Donner Summit, you might be familiar with, called one hand clapping. And there's a finish to that climb, which is a 10C called Fascination Finish. And so I was like, that's it. I'll warm up with a 5.9, we'll get on the 10C, and then this is like the start of my progression towards climbing harder. The 5.9 ended up being extremely sandbagged, barely made it through, like most of the old school 5.9s are. But I got through it on site. And so I'm like, okay, cool, I'm gonna throw myself at this 10C because, I'm trying to climb harder. That means I need to be okay with falling. I need to trust my gear. It was more of like convincing myself that I need to just trust the gear that I place. I need to be okay to fall without any context. And that's kind of where I was at mentally. So I get on this 10C Fascination Finish. It's this shitty flared corner that kind of leans left a little bit, not a splitter crack, and so the pro is really weird. I didn't bring any offset cams, which I learned after the fact were pretty critical to protect this route. I get up about halfway and I place a nut sideways in the back of this flare, and I didn't really trust it, but I continued climbing because I was in this mentality of, climb till you fall. And so I get off route, I'm up on this facey slab, totally panicked, full of fear. I scream like, a little girl as I come off the wall, and the nut saves me, and it arrested my fall. I ended up getting through the climb after that one fall without any issues. But what happened that day was that, I was extremely scared above that piece, and it held. And so therefore, in my mind, it reinforced that belief that I was trying to have, which was trust your gear, you can fall. So it almost solidified that in my mind. And so I think that portion of the story is really important because it's the mentality I carried into the day of my accident. And so the day of my accident, this is about a week later, I find a climber on Instagram who reaches out to me. He wanted to show me the area called Woodford Canyon, specifically Cloudburst Canyon, South Lake Tahoe. Hannah's with me as well. We started on 5.9 on site at, no problem, building confidence. We do a 10B, gear's a little finicky, on site that route, feeling more comfortable. And now across the little gully is an 11A. And I'm like, okay, this is it. I did a 10C last week, time to do an 11A. On Mountain Project, it's called Unknown 11A. It's got maybe 4 ratings. I think it was a 2.7. I didn't care. It was all about the grade. It was I didn't care what the experience was. I didn't care what kind of climbing it was. I didn't even look at what pro it had. I just was I'm going for this thing because I had something to prove to myself. And so I just kind of rack up and get ready. And I'm carrying this fearlessness with me as I approach this wall. Nate is belaying me with an ATC, which we'll talk about later. I clip the first bolt, which is the only bolt on the route, which is right off the ground. The ledge that I'm standing on is really small, lots of rocks everywhere, big kind of bulky rocks, and we're standing almost on this loose, talus-y, scree, kind of bad belay stance. I climb up, it's kind of this weird traverse left. I get in a 0.3, it's shallow, it's not that great, but the climb is slightly overhung and kind of sporty. And so it's one of those situations where you have a decision. You're like, okay, do I back off and get better gear, or do I just keep climbing? I kept climbing. The climb continues to be pretty thin. It looks like a crack system from the ground, but it ends up being this broken crack system where the crack is filled with more rock and smaller cracks. And so I start placing smaller and smaller gear. The first piece I place after that is a DMM peanut. This one specifically right here. It is rated for 8 kilonewtons. I clip it, move on. Then I keep climbing, get to a rest, I get another DMM peanut in, a smaller one, rated to 5 kilonewtons. And at this point, I'm considering these bolts at this time in my mind. I've built gone past the fear. I've convinced myself that the trad gear is good, and I'm just trusting these bolts. Climb up past the last piece of gear I had, about 10 feet past my last piece, and I'm looking at what I think is the crux move. And from what I can read, it's kind of a throw, and we'll talk about this later, but there's this internal dialogue we have with ourselves of our probability of whether or not we can execute the moves in front of us and stay on the wall. And to me, that percentage was going down pretty dramatically, and I was convinced that if I was going to go for this hold, I was going to fall. And so instead of just throwing myself at this hold and falling in this weird way, maybe spinning upside down, catching my foot behind my leg, I made the decision to just let go of the wall. And I thought that was the safer thing to do. I was like, okay, I'm kind of run out. If I throw this and go crazy and fall weird, I might injure myself. So I look down at my partner, and I believe I say, I'm going to let go of the wall, take. And so I said take instead of fall. And so he pulls all the slack out of the system. I come off the wall. Again, in stark contrast to the last fall I had, I was absolutely fearless. I was convinced that the system was going to save me. I was in the air, at peace, like a gym. I feel the tension pull and then a snap, and then 2 more snaps, and then all of a sudden I'm tumbling down the talus field, having decked from 30 feet off the ground. I landed standing like a pencil, hit my right foot first, and then continued to tumble. The only thing that kept me going all the way down the creek was that bolt that I clipped at the very beginning of the climb. This is the actual nut that I fell and ripped out of the wall, or rather, didn't rip out of the wall. And that's the very interesting thing about my accident, and what really threw me for a spin moving forward was that the head of the nut still was in the wall. The carabiner blew through the eyelet of the nut, as you can see here. I'll pass this around. So my placement was good, but my understanding of kilonewtons and what I was actually climbing over was not. And so, you know, I'll go into the rescue story and then we'll analyze the actual accident. So luckily there were 3 other climbers in the canyon. Nate and my girlfriend Hannah were there. And long story short, each person carried me 1 limb at a time, you know, on 4 people, 1 per limb, and slowly carried me, picked me up, put me down, picked me up, put me down, and basically self-extricated myself from this canyon back to the car. My injuries, I essentially disintegrated my right calcaneus bone. The doctor said it was anywhere from 200 to 300 separate pieces. And my right foot, my talus bone, which is the weight supporting bone, had a L fracture in it. It was non-displaced, which was great. In total, I had 16 screws and 1 plate in both my ankles, 14 of them on one side. 3 months in a wheelchair, and here I am standing today. So, you know, that's the accident story itself. I wanted to kind of take a time to open this up to questions in terms of the situation of the accident and maybe some details that you might be interested in exploring before I go into, the nuances of recovery and risk management as it is in my mind today. Does anybody have any questions about the accident? So all 3. So no, so the first one that took all the weight was the one that blew out the backside. And then the second one ripped out of the wall. And then the third one, which was my 0.3, also came out of the wall. And that one, you could tell was cross-loaded because the lobes were bent on one side after I pulled, it was a cam, yeah. Go ahead.
So why do you think there was first piece?
So that's a good question. I think one thing to talk about first is that 5 kilonewtons isn't that much. And I think that was a misconception I had in my mind. You know, especially as a heavier climber, I'm sitting at like 200 plus, and with a full rack, maybe 230. That's a lot of weight. And I think a lot of people who are talking about falling on these small cams or small gear, you might look at them and they're probably like a 145 pound sport climber. I think the disparity there needs to be talked about a lot more. As heavier climbers, we need to be really cognizant about our forces in the system. So not only was it my weight, but like I talked about when I said take, he pulled all the slack out of the system. And so therefore, basically I shock loaded that first piece with almost like a close to static system. And then, the other thing that went into it as well, and there's no real way to prove this, but I was using pretty thin carabiners. And so there's a chance that the surface area that I had through that eyelet wasn't big enough. And so, that's something to consider if you're climbing with really small wires, especially. Use a carabiner that's a little thicker or round, and that will displace the pressure around that wire a lot more efficiently than some of those really thin nanos that are really, really pointed. Yeah.
And how far above the east do you think you were?
I was about 10 feet from my last piece of pro. It was like a few feet past my feet. I remember looking down and seeing it. Yeah. Yeah, it sucks. And it was like, I chose the wrong climb. For someone pushing your grades, I chose the wrong climb. I chose a overhanging sport climb, essentially, with bad trad gear. And it's like, there's so many things you can do to not have yourself in that situation. It was a full storm where all these things happened into one thing. It resulted in this accident where tension in the system, small gear, I'm a heavy climber. It's a sport route. I'm not really good with my hands. I'm much more of like a on your feet kind of climber. And so it just all culminated into this accident. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
First thought, shoot.
Hannah can attest to this. I was like, my ankles. I don't know if you guys seen what's the snowboarder on Chad's Gap. Have you guys seen that video? There's this specific gap, and he cases the landing and tomahawks down the other side, and it screams the same thing. He's just like, from afar you can hear it on the camera. He's just like, my ankles. That was me. I was just like absolutely decimated. like my right foot was already super swollen, and I need to get this climbing shoe off me now. Like this shoe needs to come off. And so I like pulled my shoe off and essentially just laid there on my back with both my heels up off the ground, because I was like, these things aren't touching the ground again. You know, like that's not happening. I don't care what happens, these things aren't touching the ground. And I think that's like, I've heard anecdotally from other people when they get into these accidents, they try to walk or they crawl and they trip and they kick their foot. Like that's when you do real permanent damage to an injury like that. If you do find yourself in a bone shattering accident or a breaking bone accident, it's really important to mobilize those areas and minimize any sort of impact that's left on those injuries. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm standing here, honestly. And I, super grateful to have a really concerned surgeon who went through a bunch of his own surgeries. He got in a ski accident and like had his bone infection. They twisted his foot on wrong. He went through like 4 different surgeries. He's an orthopedic surgeon, and he went through 4 surgeries with professionals to get a simple tib fib shatter fixed. And so I'm coming to him, and he's just like, I can't do this to you. I've already gone through it. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that you have a very flawless surgery. And so there's a lesson there too. Like, don't just go to the first doctor you see. Like, I went to an urgent care, got an x-ray. I was like, am I going to die tonight? And they said, no. I said, great, give me those pain meds. I'm going home. They're like, no, you need to go to a hospital. I was like, the hell I'm going to a hospital? Like, I'm going to Rock Clinic. I'm going to a clinic. Not only is it way cheaper, but you have specialized people there that aren't churn and burning people. They're meant there to do orthopedic surgery. So if you have that option, it saves you money, and you also have a higher chance of finding a surgeon that's going to take better care of you, and also tend to be more sterile environments than a hospital. So, broad generalization there. Any other questions on the accident itself, circumstantially? No? Okay, cool. So,
What was the partner's reaction?
honestly, Nate and I butted heads afterward because I posted the whole accident report on it's published in the AAC journal. And so, I'm very honest when it comes to these kind of things. I just lay it out as it is. And, I included the Belay system. I included everything that was involved. And he kind of felt attacked. He almost felt like I was blaming him for the accident because of his use of an ATC, which was not the case. But anyway, he was locked on, militant, just like he was the one who went and got those other climbers. No panic, like absolutely a keystone person for why that went well. Yeah. Yeah, so I bring up the ATC a lot because I think it's important. So the funny thing is that if he had not taken the slack out of the system and really knew how to use an ATC, the ATC would have actually been possibly less impact on the system because of the slippage that's involved. So, that's one of the cool things about an ATC is that if you allow, when you take a fall, there's going to be a little bit of rope slippage through the device, and that, force over time, right? So the more time you have to spread over the force, the less force you're going to have. I know that's not very scientific, I'm doing a bad job at explaining that, but you guys get the point. With a gree-gree, that cam locks immediately, and so it removes that kind of slippage that you get. And it's a small amount of time, but when you're talking about high loads like that, it really makes a difference. The catch to me is that is not a reason why to use an ATC in every circumstance, in my opinion. I really struggle with the fact that if you're using an ATC and you kick a rock down and you knock out your belayer, you're no longer on belay. If he has a seizure, she has a seizure, or is an undisclosed medical condition that you were not aware of, has diabetes and didn't tell you and passes out, whatever the case may be, if you do not have a conscious belayer, you are no longer on belay. And to me, that is not a risk that I'm willing to take, especially with new partners. And so for me, I always like, how to use a gree-gree? There you go. Or, I'm more comfortable with you using a gree-gree. I'd say I'd pretty much explicitly climb on a gree-gree. I'd say there obviously are circumstances where it makes more sense, especially when you start getting into like icy snow, where ATC just makes sense. But I think it's important if you are using an ATC, you got to really know what you're doing. Your partner's life's in your hands, and a simple mistake, a lack of paying attention. You go down to grab a sandwich, you grab to go to power gel, your partner looks great, you go to get some water, and you have a lapse of judgment, and that system starts burning and cooking. There's nothing you can do to stop it. And so it's just something to be aware of. The gree-gree, I love that, not only for me as a leader, but as a belayer too. I want that peace of mind as well. I want to be able to relax a little bit. I want to be able to go get some water and create that efficiency of I interviewed Jack Kuzel, and he says like, do something constantly. And like, I carry that a lot in my climbing is like, every second you're sitting there at the belay, there's something to do. Eat a snack, drink some water, look up the beta, take some pictures of your partner, whatever it is, there's something to do. With an ATC, it's extremely limiting because you have to be locked. You cannot sacrifice that brake strand when you're using an ATC. Yeah, so it's a great crab yacht question to kind of the next chapter here. So the question was like psychologically getting back to rock. The passion for climbing never left me. I was always there to climb, and it was just like, how soon can I get back? And so it was more about the process of how to get there. And there was a real psychological issue with trad gear, especially because I blew the back of the eyelet out. And to me, that wasn't even possible. I didn't think that was a possibility, even though it obviously is. And if you think about it well enough, you should know that's a possibility. That was part of the issue as well. I wasn't thinking enough about the whole safety system. But it really shook me. I was like, okay, well, what the heck else do I not know? What do I not know? It's hard to trust yourself anymore because you made such a terrible judgment call. And so, I took baby steps. I started climbing when I was able, I had a boot on after probably 3 months of a cast, and I top roped in a gym and just like got used to the movement again. And then I, got really comfortable with top roping in a gym, and I led a 5.8 with my boot on. The movement, and my efficiency, especially on lower grades in terms of movement, I feel very confident in my movement. So I was able to make that judgment call. I was like, okay, I can lead a 5.8 in the gym. The chances of me coming off are next to zero. So I'm willing to risk whatever it was. Now, specifically after I got into climbing movement, there was this question you're talking about is, how do I trust trad gear again? And, I basically comprised this system where I went to a local crag and I brought 2 ropes. One was a lead rope and one was a top rope belay. And I had 2 belayers. And so I basically, set up a top rope, had a lead belayer, had a top rope belayer, and I brought both ropes up. And basically I placed gear, and when I was ready to take a fall, I would have the top rope belayer dish out slack enough to where if the piece fell or failed, I wouldn't hit the ground and I'd have a clean fall and the top rope system would arrest my fall. And I did that a couple times that day, and all of the pieces held. And they were all cams. I tried different sizes. I tried a nut, so it just proved to me that like the systems do work and they are relatively bulletproof. You just got to know when they're not. And so, that day alone gave me enough confidence to start going out and leading trad. And so pretty recently after I took my buddy out and we went to PSOM slabs in Pine Creek, and I did, I think it's called High Life. It's like a 4-pitch, 5.9 slab climb. Slab's my specialty, so I love being on my feet, and so it was in my wheelhouse. And I just like used it as a practice. Like, hey, how am I going to do today? Let me bring gear, and I'm going to place the gear and see how I do. And it went great. I on-sided the route. I placed the gear. I felt good, and I just started building upon that day. And so, I'm grateful to never have actually had this very like profound struggle with like getting back into climbing. It just brought me back to ground floor and really made me reassess what risk was, how I can climb safely, how I need to start learning more. And I just built my period back up from the base, and then took little baby steps. And honestly, it's been 3.5 years since my accident, and it hasn't been until like very recently, I'd say these last 12 months or so, that I've really kind of broken out and started to push myself beyond my capabilities that I was as a climber before the accident. It's been very recent. So I would say it took about 2 years. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. Yeah.
Have you taken any other courses to like build your baseline for like safety like systems?
So it's a great question. No, I haven't. I have been very grateful with this Instagram channel that I run. People are extremely opinionated. And so when I post my climbing systems, at first when I was a beginner climber and I was posting these videos, I would say most of the comments I would get were hateful and, you don't know what you're doing, that's a bad system. And at the very beginning, I was like, fuck these people, everybody's an asshole. But then after my accident, I was like, maybe I'm the asshole, and maybe I don't know what I'm doing, you know? And so I just took a real hard look at myself as a climber. I was like, I don't know anything, really. I need to like, everybody has an opinion for a reason, right? There's always some truth behind someone's opinion. And so I took it upon myself for every comment that I got on my Instagram that was related to my safety or systems or what I was doing as a climber. What truth is there to this? How can I be better? How can I learn? And over the last, I've been doing this channel for 10 years. I would say a large majority of the lessons I've learned and the safety systems I've learned as a climber have been through response and feedback like that from my channel, and also through interviewing people on the podcast that I run as well. So it's been like very much like acquiring knowledge in this very specific way that I've built around myself for climbing. But I think that it's a very unique situation. It doesn't apply to most people. So I think honestly the best thing you can do is hire a guide. I think that it's personal, it's one-on-one, and you can come to him or her with specific questions and be like, I want to learn this on this route or something like that. And you can like take these baby steps, like you build yourself up to this platform. You're like, okay, I'm ready to take the next step, but I don't trust myself on X, Y, and Z, or I don't really know the systems of X, Y, and Z. I want to simul rappel. I want to learn how to run it out a little bit more. I want to, learn how to trust my placements better. These are the specific questions you can get with a guide and get really nitty gritty on these things. I do feel like, I haven't done a lot of them, but anecdotally from the experiences I've heard, when you go to these large clinics and these large groups, a lot of it gets missed. It's very general information. We can get all that stuff on YouTube. We can watch people place 1,000 cams. We can get all that information. It's really, really, when you're trying to push yourself to that next level, I do think that hiring a guide for half a day or something like that is just absolutely super critical.
Notice you have a pile of gear keyed down there.
Yeah, those are for later.
Okay.
Well, those are for later. Yeah.
Do you have any lasting physical limitations from the accident, or are you giving a full 100%?
Yeah, it's a good question. Lasting physical injuries from the accident. Every day I walk around with a limp pretty much. It's weird. I'm better at climbing than I am walking. I can't really run either. It's really hard for me to run. I basically lack like flexibility until I start using it, and then it kind of goes back to normal. And then, like, let's say I go a big day, I do rainbow wall, I'm fine all day. I get back to the car and I sit in the car for like 2 seconds, drink a Gatorade. I try to take another step out the car and I almost fall over. So it's like a really rapid inflammation after I stop moving. But then the funny thing is even after a huge day like that, if I just go walking down the road, I'll limp for 15 minutes and then it goes away. And so it's weird. It's almost this like post-activity arthritis. So I don't really know the longer term implications of that, but I feel extremely blessed that it hurts in the way that it does. It hurts after I work, not during. And so I'm able to climb without issue. Jumping's really hard too. Can't jump. Any sort of explosive power through my right foot, it's really tough. But static tension, like stemming, I don't have any issues. Okay, so this next kind of like chapter to this is kind of my approach to climbing now. What systems and what nuances of risk management and trad gear do I carry into my climbing now post-accident? And that kind of what this whole story was about, was laying that foundation. And the first thing that I like to talk about is reminding everybody that not falling is always our first line of defense to safety. Would you all agree that falling is one of the highest chances, like the situations in which we will get injured the most is when we come off the wall, right? If we're climbing, the only thing that's really gonna hurt you is a rock fall. And I'd say it's pretty dangerous, but when you fall, you open yourself up to injury. You're opening yourself up to test the systems that you made. You're testing your own judgment, you're testing your own gear, and you're finding out if you were correct or wrong. If you're not falling, you're never testing your systems. And so you don't get that feedback, but you also stay safer because you never fall. So I think the main thing to remember is if you want to stay safe, don't fall. That's kind of the general thing. Now, we'll get into this a little later of like the idea if you're not falling, you're not trying. And I think that there's a bridge there. But I think ultimately safety, our biggest thing we could do to stay safe is to try to limit the amount of times we fall as climbers. I'm specifically talking about trad here. Sport climbing is a different story. I talked about this before. We build a relationship with our body and our connection to the rock. And at least for me, I have this percentage in my head. What percentage am I going to come off after doing the sequences of moves? I can see the route. I know what it's asking me to do. Am I going to fall? What percentage am I going to fall? I think building that relationship with yourself, your body, that mind to body connection is really important, because it allows us to there in turn mitigate our risk. So if our chances of falling are going up, we start to place more gear, or we take our safety a little bit more seriously. If our chances of not falling are really low, those are the situations where we can start simuling, where we can start running it out, where I can, I'm not the kind of climber that places pro every 5 feet. If you've climbed with me, you'll be following me, and there'll be like 35 feet between pro sometimes. I've built such a strong relationship with my ability to know when I'm on the wall and when I'm not. And so I think there's huge safety there. So it's just, the advice there is just to build that relationship with yourself as a trad climber. Know when you're gonna be good, and just like be okay in a situation where your safety is your attachment to the wall. One other thing for this is, another way I do this, especially when it starts getting into harder climbing, is climbing from stance to stance. When you read the rock, you can look for where your next rest is going to be. And ideally, when you're trad climbing, you're placing pro at rests, not in the middle of a crux or in the middle of a sequence. And I think that a lot of people, especially earlier in the trad climbing, get caught up on this. They have this fear in their mind of like, oh my gosh, I'm 5 feet past my last piece of pro. It doesn't matter where I am on the wall. My alarm bells are going off. I need to put a piece in now. And little do they know, 2 to 3 feet above them is this huge stance where you can go hands-free. But they're just underneath, cruxing in the finger crack, trying to get pro in. And honestly, that's a lot of times where you fall, is when you're trying to put pro in when you shouldn't. So reading the rock, climbing in sequences, and looking for rest to place your pro is another really, really good tip that I carry along with myself today. Okay, so I talked about the idea of not falling is safety. And I think, like I said, when we're talking about trying hard, especially in the climbing community, I say especially in the sport climbing community, there's this phrase of, if you're not falling, you're not trying. And I see a lot on social media. I see it a lot in my own friend group, where there's this pressure to like, dude, like you need to be okay with falling. Like that's part of climbing, it's part of climbing. And I think it's really bled over into trad climbing. And if you look at the history of trad climbing, obviously technology has come a long way, but trad climbing used to be a no-fall sport. You do not fall when you trad climb. And so I think that we've lost a little bit of that old school mentality when it comes to trad climbing. And the argument against that is that, safety's come a long way. Trad gear's come a long way. We have way more tools to secure our safety. And while that's true, I think that it doesn't mean that we should let go of that old school mentality of realizing that if we don't fall, that is our first line of safety. So it's just re-emphasizing that point. Now, when we are talking about falling, this is something I had to wrestle with really recently, especially like going after routes like Rainbow Wall and Cloud Tower. If you are pushing yourself, it is inevitable, you will fall. And it's something that's going to happen. And like I said, when you build that relationship with your mind and body of understanding when that is, then you can start to place more pro. And, when you get to a crux section, put 2 pieces in, put 3 pieces in. I don't care how many pieces you put in, just ensure your safety. Like I'll use an example like on Rainbow Wall that I don't know if anybody's done it, but the second pitch, that 11D pitch, to me is the secret crux of the entire route. There's 2 12A pitches above, and I don't think they're as hard as this pitch. Anyway, it's like this really tiny crack you get up, and then there's this boulder move you have got to do. It's really hard. And, I had followed this pitch a couple times until I knew what I was getting myself into. And so I get below this crux, and I place 3 cams in sequentially, like right within like this far from each other. And then I climb up and then get another black totem in. I ended up whipping twice on that route. And, surprise, surprise, the black totem caught both falls, which was amazing. But it gave me the confidence to try hard and to put myself in a position where I was 98% going to come off the wall. But I didn't have the fear because I had a nest of gear underneath that black totem. I knew that if I come off, I was going to be okay. It's a vertical route, and I had 3 cams in. A lot of my buddy came up and he's like, I'm just going to pump out, try to take all the gear out. And it's like, yeah, sure. I don't really care. Like to me, that's like, I'm overkill on safety. And maybe as I get down the road and I build more relationship with gear and I get more experience and I have a deeper understanding and a wider depth of experience with trad gear, I can start to make those judgment calls and be like, I only need 1 cam here. I only need 2 cams here. But when you're first getting into this and you're pushing your grades and you're like pushing your on-site limit and you're really pushing the grades, I don't find like there's any reason not to stitch it up and bring more gear. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is the on-site mentality and ego and kind of the dangers that they cultivate in trad climbing. So I love on-siting routes. To me, it's honestly one of the purest forms of competence in climbing. The ability to show up to a route, climb it first go, do it clean, read the gear, and just execute it flawlessly. I mean, how magical is that? That is just like, that's what climbing's about to me. And there's no denying that kind of climbing is extremely addictive. And it can be where you just go around and on-site routes all the time. You just pick routes within your bubble and you just on-site. That's what I did for 6 years. I basically on-sited every route I went to, and I always just pushed the envelope a little bit so I could on-site it. But it kept me in this bubble of like 10 minus for 6-7 years. And I think that people who climb like that, when they start to push grades, can carry over that on-site mentality into harder grades. But in reality, we can't on-site everything we climb, especially if you're trying to climb hard. So I think removing that pressure to on-site routes when you're trying to push your grades is super healthy, because when you're trying to on-site a route, you're essentially climbing until you fall, right? And so you're putting yourself in this position where you are going to fall if you are trying to on-site a route above your limit. Most likely, your chances of falling are extremely high. So setting aside that ego, asking ourselves, why do we want to on-site this route? Who really cares? I have a buddy who is like very much into this mentality of on-siting, and it really means a lot to him. And it differs from person to person. But for me, safety means more than me on-siting a route. I can always come back and red point it. I'm more proud of executing a route safely and getting back home and getting more beta so I can come back to it and maybe climb it clean the next time. And I think on this point, if we're not on-siting, what other options do we have? And I think that some of the tools of safety we don't talk about are taking or down climbing. These were things that didn't even cross my mind when I was beginning to climb. It wasn't an option. I was stuck in this onset or die mentality where you don't place a cam and take. You don't down climb. Like it's so weird to think about it now, where it was not even an option. Not because I didn't allow myself to do it, but because I didn't even think of it. And so now, I'll use Cloud Tower. That last pitch is super hard. I got to the top. My percentage in my mind of me falling was like 95%. The alarm bells were going off. Like, sure, I could try to punch the crux and go for the hold and maybe make it, but the chances of me doing that are really low, and I know it. I'm honest with myself. I know I'm not going to make it. And so what do? Place a piece of cam, I take it, rest, shake it out, get over the pump, and then what do you know? Get off the system, and I flash the rest of the route. And so it's like simple things like that, like just setting the ego aside and allow yourself to take, allow yourself to rest. Most of the time we fall is because we're so gripped and like mentally overstimulated. At least for me, I find myself like breathing really hard and like getting super pumped, and I'm like overthinking it. The feet start to disappear and I go blind, I get tunnel vision, and then placing a cam and resting and shaking it out and like looking around and like, oh, there's a foot here, there's a foot here. I can't believe I didn't see that hand jam up there. Things like that, like the whole route starts to open up to you, and then you can climb it so much more clean and beautifully. I am not a like panicked climber. I do not like climbing like unstable. I very love fluid, controlled motion. Like if I'm executing a move, it's because I feel like I know it goes, and I'm gonna commit and stay secure and like very smooth. And if I can't climb like that, I'm gonna take and I'm gonna suss it out and figure out why. What am I doing wrong? Because you watch all these professional climbers climb and make these really hard routes look really easy. Why is that? Because they know exactly where their body needs to go. They have the movement dialed so perfectly that it looks easy, because it probably feels, obviously I'm not generalizing, but some of these routes feel generally easy for these people because they know exactly what they're doing, or they're so strong that they have the capability to stay calm. And I think it's just so important to carry that with us. It's like, stay calm, stay relaxed. You're going to climb way harder if you're a more calm, relaxed, focused climber. I see a lot in the community these days, both online and kind of on the wall, is this pressure to be more efficient and to bring less gear. You see racks people post on certain climbs and they're like, oh, I only brought X, Y, and Z, or you know, someone's like, you don't need the 5 or things like that. To each their own. I am the opposite way. If someone's like, don't bring the 5, I bring the 5. Someone's like, you know, if Mountain Project calls for a double rack, might bring triples. You know, it just depends. Obviously, I'm generalizing, but in general, I bring more gear than necessary. And I have never regretted it. I think Max said it so well in the podcast. He said, you're not sending because you brought an extra cam. You know, like it's not going to cause you to not go up the wall. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on routes with a little bit extra gear than it was called for. I get to the anchor and I'm out of gear. And I did go through some runouts. So like some of the times the things that routes call for are for maybe it's like the dialed gear set. You know, you're either way above the grade for this or you have the route so dialed. This is the basic rack that you need. If you're an on-siter and you like to go after routes for the first time, just bring extra gear, bring extra nuts, bring an extra cam. It's not going to weigh you down. It's not going to take you off the wall. So that was a big thing for me. Like everybody I climb with, they're like, oh, you bring so much gear. And it's like, well, yeah, like I'm climbing extremely safe and I'm going to keep climbing as long as I can that way. And like I said before, as I build a wider depth of experience and I get more time, I'll be able to kind of lean that down. But it's not, that advice to lean down is not for everybody. Another note, trad anchors. So if you're climbing, like a lot of the routes out here in Red Rock are bolted anchors, which thank God, thank you to everybody who bolts out there. I love it. But not all the routes are like that. Sometimes you got trad anchors and that eats up 6 pieces every time. 3 for you, 3 for your partner. That's 6 pieces of gear you don't have on your rack to climb. And I think a lot of people underestimate that. You know, if you're climbing a trad only route, bring extra gear to account for the anchors you're gonna have to bid. Okay, so onto the fun part. So I want to talk specifically about totems. Who is here familiar with totems? Okay, cool. You all love them, right? They're amazing? Oh yeah, they're amazing. I love them too. But they have some extreme weaknesses that I'd like to talk about today that I think go unnoticed. So I'm going to hand out a couple of totems so everybody can take a look, and I'll start to talk about them, and we can actually look at the totems, and we'll talk about exactly what I'm talking about. First off, the main differences between totems and regular cams is that they're stemless. So a C4, so I have C4s and Z4s out there. You'll notice that they have a central stem, and the totems don't. And so I want to talk a little bit about how the totems bear weight. So if you look at the totem itself, it's got these wires that run down to the handles and the actual, what is it called? The sling that the carabiner is attached to. Those wires are weight bearing. So if you follow them all the way up to the head, you'll see the tiny micro wires that wrap through the head of the totem, and those ones are weight bearing. And then the other ones are for the trigger only. And so one thing to keep in mind with these totems is that if one of those wires break that's attached to the head that goes down to the sling, that entire cam will fail. It's the tiny wire. Look at how tiny that wire is. If one of those gets cut, the load-bearing wires, that totem will fail. And so that's just one of the weaknesses to keep in mind. And the only situations where that can really happen is in a really shallow placement next to a sharp edge. I've actually had a couple people reach out to me on Instagram about this specifically happening to them, especially the black totem. Shallow placement, take a whip, it rubs down the side, and then it cuts one of those wires and the whole cam explodes. Another thing to keep in mind is totems, a lot of people say that they're rated for 2 lobes only. And while that's true, it's only for passive placements. It's for a aid load, really low kilonewtons. And there are some people that believe that they're for dynamic falls, and it's just not true. So don't trust your life on a dynamic fall on 2 lobes on a totem. While there are some stories of it holding, again, it's like the 140-pound sport climber, and it's probably a really special circumstance where that held. So make sure all 4 lobes are engaged when you're using a totem. The next big difference between a C4 and a totem, like I said, the stemless thing, C4s can be placed like nuts. So when they're fully umbrellaed, you can place them as a nut, like an umbrella in a constriction. Totems, you cannot do that. They will explode. Cannot place totems as passive gear. So while you might not purposely place a totem as a passive piece of pro, you might place it in a spot where it's kind of flaring, and as it walks, all of a sudden it's opened all the way, and now it's in an umbrella placement, that's going to fail and explode. So things to keep in mind when placing totems are there for sure. The second thing is totems, they're oval shape. They make a lot of force left and right, more than a C4 does. And so they're known to break the rock that they're into in soft sandstone. So if you're climbing in Zion or Sedona or certain parts of the white rock out here in Red Rocks, if you're placing totems in the shallow placements or in a placement where the rock on one side is thin, there's a chance that that is going to physically break the rock that it's in and cause the cam to fail. So another kind of weakness for totems. Now, it's just these are important things to know when you're placing gear, because when you're choosing your kit, I don't know how many times I've reached down for a totem and just been like, oh, I'm gonna do a Z4 here. You know, oh, it's a little soft here, I'm gonna use a Z4. And who knows, like those small decisions like that are what save your life in the mountains. Okay, so we talked about KN ratings a little bit, and how like I'm a heavier climber and we gotta really take into account, you know, how heavy we are and what kind of forces we put in our systems. Silas Rossi, he's an IFMGA certified guide. He had a really cool note on this, and specifically how we can mitigate mitigate risk in this way. He recommends 8 kilonewtons at the high point. And so that means, you know, some of these cams I'm handing out to you are 5 kilonewtons. The micro nut that I had was 5 kilonewtons. You know, if we're in a situation where all we have is that, we're gonna place another piece. And ideally, we do a sliding X with an alpine sling and link those two pieces together so that we're spreading the load over 2 pieces. So we have 2 5 kilonewton pieces, we have 10 now, and that meets our minimum quota of 8 kilonewtons. If we don't, if we're in a crazy stance and we have one arm, you know, and you're kind of pumping out and you don't have the opportunity to build a sliding X with an alpine draw, at least put 2 or 3 pieces in sequential order. At the very minimum, do that. So just like, I thought it was really cool to think about it in a mathematical way, right? How many kilonewtons do I have at the high point? How much safety do I have at the high point? These are questions we should be asking ourselves as we climb, and not just like, oh, that placement was bomber. You know, it's like, that's all subjective. It's really easy to get caught up in our own ego and in our judgment when we're thinking things subjectively. So kilonewtons is an objective way to think about things, which is very cool. All right, last 2 stories here. You've all heard about all the rappel deaths, especially in talk heats, of soft goods failing and causing rappel accidents. That almost happened to me. I was rappelling off of Bird Hunter Buttress on the backside of Rainbow Wall, and it's a seldomly traveled rappel route. We were kind of on-site descending. I get to this tree, and this sling didn't look like this, was wrapped around the tree. And I'd say the whole thing looked like this 2-inch segment of sling. It's not faded, the colors are good, it wasn't really fuzzy, it looked like a brand new sling. You're like, oh, lucky us. So we start setting up for rappel, you know, we kind of pick at it, we pull it apart, like separate it, look at it, all the spots that were exposed, still looked good. And then, you know, I'm clipped into rappel, the ropes run through, I'm ready to weight the system, and then we both go like, let's check this one more time. And we look at it, and we found this one spot that was just a little frayed, and we started picking at it with our nails, and it turned into this. And so, you know, the lesson there, it was a really close call, and it really could have been a horrific story. I don't trust soft goods very much. You know, at the very least, if you're convinced it's good, put a backup in, put a cam in, put a nut, wrap a different part of the tree, and put it in a way where you're weighting the old system, so you're testing it, but if it fails, your backup system saves you. It's the same with rappelling on V-threads and ice. You're gonna build a V-thread and you use an ice screw as a backup. We should be using the same mentality when we're wrapping off soft goods that we haven't put on ourselves. And it's kind of hard to justify it, especially when you see like some of the stuff in Red Rocks is just like a nest of like 10 pieces of cord. You just don't know how long things have been there, and you know, the scary thing about rappelling is we have no redundancy. And so making sure the first person is testing that redundancy and having a backup for them is really, really important. So that's just kind of like I hang this in my wall to make me remember that every time. Last story. This is a bolt hanger that came off a Voyager while I was in Yosemite recently. It's a slab traverse, and the bolt was at my foot. So he must have like lead bolt drilled that pitch, which is crazy. And I clip it, and I noticed it's a hanger, but it's like kind of cruxy, so I didn't have time to analyze the bolt hanger or the nut and kind of look at it. It looked like a brand new, I mean, this thing is like brand new. So I clipped it. I get to the anchor, I start top belaying him, and it's like making the rope go like this, and all of a sudden the hanger just lifts off the bolt and slides all the way down to my last cam. And my partner was luckily able to like on-site the route because the whole traverse was unprotected at this point because there was no more hanger anymore. It's like 30 feet of like 10B face that he had to get across. So it's just another lesson. It's like risk is out there. It's always there waiting to strike. And it's our job to try to be cognizant enough to be prepared and aware of the things that can happen and not just relying on luck to make sure we can come out the other side. You know, alpine climbing and ice climbing and high alpine climbing have this mentality a lot because the objective hazards are so high and the risks are so real. I think that trad climbing has gotten a little normalized in a way, and I think there are real risks out there, and it's really important to take them seriously and just really check your systems. Make sure your partners are on the same page. Make sure your communication with your partners about safety systems, what you guys are going to do, so there's no accidents like we just had in Red Rock with the Repel accident. Communication's huge. Double check your system. You know, if you're making a new system, check the new one before you get off the old one. Things like that. There's all the small things that really keep us alive. So, yeah, that's kind of like all I had planned. Any questions for me at all? Good. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.